Hello, it's Jim Huddy here again. I'm the Cornwall CCG Clinical Lead for Chronic Pain, and this is part 2 of a mini-series regarding the use of opioids in primary care. Part 1 was all to do with deprescribing and how to get patients off the drugs if that was deemed appropriate. Now this one is all about when to start them, when to think about it, how to do it safely, and when to close the door if things aren't improving. I've been working in collaboration with secondary care, Dr. Keith Mitchell from the Pain Clinic, Adrian Flynn, consultant liaison psychiatrist, and Paul Thornton, who's a gastroenterologist. I'm going to quickly summarise what we said in our previous video from the summer of 2017. The work we've done is published on the Cornwall Formulary website. The link's down at the bottom left of the page. We've got detailed information for patients where they can download and use this document electronically, which tells them all about chronic pain and how to employ self-management, which is a good, wholesome, sensible alternative to medications for use in chronic pain. Similarly, we've got a very thorough, quite long electronic Word document for use by clinicians, which will tell you all things you need to know about managing chronic pain, but it is quite heavy, which is why we are doing these videos. The video from last summer, as I previously mentioned, is on this page. We've also got some new documents that you can use. The first one's a one-page flyer that you can print and give to patients, which explains to them how to get to the patient information that I've described earlier. If you're thinking of trying opioids, and actually the second video in this series is going to be all about that, but there's some written information there with an opioid contract. The third article is more relevant to this video. If you're tapering or stopping opioids, it's written information to explain to patients why we think that's a good idea, so they can read that before you embark. If you want to write to patients to contact them when they're on opioids, there's a suggested letter there, and also some information that you can give to patients who are on weaker medications. Just to quickly summarise what's happening down here in Cornwall. We're a fairly heavy prescriber of opioids. We're on about the 70th centile, and we spend £3.3 million a year on these drugs. Our prescribing team have analysed data at CCG and practice level, which shows our prescribing habits of morphine equivalent doses, which is subcategorized by particular drugs. Here you can see the oral morphine equivalent prescriptions by each GP surgery in Cornwall. Very, very big variability in prescribing habits. Let's just remind ourselves of the evidence for the use of opioids in chronic pain. Well, it's poor. There is some evidence of benefit in randomized controlled trials lasting less than 3 months, although the methods are flawed in these trials. Over 3 months, there's no RCT evidence, but there are some extension trials which shows that there might be some benefit for some patients some of the time, but not much benefit, and only in about 1 in 5 patients maybe. There's no improvement in function has ever been shown. Conversely, the risks are significant of side effects, gastrointestinal, endocrine, falls for our elderly patients, and risks to dwindling bone health, overdose, death, of course, is a big concern, particularly in Cornwall with a high suicide rate. And observational studies, although they don't show cause, there is an association with higher doses, worse pain, worse function, worse quality of life, more likely to be out of work, and increase use of healthcare resources. We think that reducing Cornwall's heavy prescribing of opioid analgesics is clinically and ethically justified. So to the matter in hand, the opioid trial. So what we're going to be talking about here is when to consider using opioids in chronic pain, why, how to do it, what are the risks or the benefits, and how to get out of there if things aren't going according to plan. I'm basing a lot of this talk on the Opioids Aware subsection of the Faculty of Pain Medicine website. Let's have a look at their golden rules. There's good evidence for opioids in acute pain and palliative pain, but not in long-term pain. A small number of patients might get some benefit long-term, particularly if the doses are low and intermittent. The chance of harm increases dramatically over 120 milligrams. This could be considered a national speed limit with no increase in benefit. 120 is plenty. Patients using opioids but still in pain, then the opioids are not effective and should be stopped. I'm a little bit anxious about that, but of course a lot of patients will still get some pain. The question is whether their lives are improved and their functions improved. And lastly, chronic pain is very complex biopsychosocial issues, and sometimes this needs expert assessment at the pain clinic. So why are we using opioids when we know that there's no good RCT evidence of benefit long term? Well, we know that anecdotally some patients do benefit quite a lot, and we mustn't deny them an important treatment that might help them. And some patients don't get tolerant and don't get dependent and addicted. But remember that this is quite an unusual situation, and the majority of patients will get harmed. So use them wisely. So without sounding too opiophobic, remember that this is risky prescribing. You need to take utmost care. You're potentially opening a hazardous door which might need closing, and closing it can be somewhere between challenging and a nightmare. Be careful not to add to the problems of a usually very vulnerable group of patients. So what I want to do now is to consider a hypothetical consultation, and we can work through that. These two look like they're getting on pretty well. What do we do when we've diagnosed someone with chronic pain, we've assessed them, we've excluded organic disease, and what do we do next? Well, the next thing is to consider and discuss self-management, simple analgesics. We're much more relying now on self-management of chronic pain. All the information for patients is on the website, and there's a good evidence base that retraining of mind, body and soul can really help people cope with how they are. Just to recap, this is where it is on the formulary site, and please do explain to patients that this is to be used electronically like a website. There's lots of internal and external links to YouTube clips, and it's a bit more digestible than you might think at first glance. How do patients find our information? Well, if you print out the first of the documents at the bottom of the page, that's a one-page flyer which explains to them just how to get there. So you can leave that with them, hand over to them to do their research, and come back to you in a few weeks to discuss further. So we're meeting up for review. Everything's going well. This lady's been through the self-management information. She's got a yoga group set up. She's doing some online mindfulness meditative meditations, and she realizes that she needs to live with her pain more than battling against it. But despite using simple analgesia, she's still struggling to do some of her activities of daily living. So we open up the discussion regarding opioids. She needs information about risks and benefits to take away, to read about, and we've got this for you on our website. It's the second of the printable documents. It's a 10-page document which gives information about the risks and probably the unlikely benefits, about driving, about how to wean off the drugs if they're not working. There's a treatment agreement, otherwise known as the contract, which includes a calculator to assess the risk of dependence and addiction. There's the one-page flyer and also a symptom diary to fill out during the opioid trial. This is the contract part, and this is the symptom outcome diary. So where are we? We've made a good rapport with this patient. She's undergoing self-management. She's trying simple medications, and she's keen to, both of you are keen to try opioids because they might help. But you need to know if there's any risk that she might become dependent or abuse these drugs. It's not unusual for patients to get dependent on these drugs, maybe up to a third in some series. Here's a fairly simple scoring system which is included in the opioid contract paperwork. Low score means low risk, moderate score means moderate risk, high score means a high risk of dependence and addictive potential. And our advice would be that if the risk is too high, just don't prescribe at all. Little bit like the UK Med risk of side effects or complications for use in contraceptives. You just don't go there if the risk is high enough. Okay, so we're good to go. We want to try these drugs. Then you've got to wonder to yourself, do you want to use the treatment agreement, the opioid contract? Well, what is it? It's a treatment agreement for signature by the patient and the clinicians describing terms and condition for continued prescribing, for example, no early scripts, no lost scripts, no duplicate prescribing, safe storage, no selling of the drugs or diverting the drugs. It describes the condition that's being treated, the drugs that are being started, ceiling doses for the future, review dates, agreed beneficial outcomes that need to be fulfilled, and a weaning strategy if required. We sort of see this really as a prescriber empowerment document, so that if patients make demands later on in the treatment course, you can always refer back to this signed copy. Don't forget the symptom outcome diary, where you can document what medications the patients are taking. They can fill out pain scores twice a day, what activities were achieved, what activities were failed, how sleep was, and a general feeling for whether things are better or worse than pre-treatment. Use this at your next review. So let's prescribe. Right, opioid trial, what do we do? Well, basically, you give a decent dose of a strong opioid for a few weeks and see what happens. If the side effects are tolerable and there's overall benefit and an improvement in quality of life, then you carry on the drug. If there's intolerable side effects, no improvement in pain, no improvement in function, then you stop them and you don't try them again because the trial has failed. What do we mean by benefit? Well, not just an improvement in pain from the patient's description, but we want to objectively see improvements in function. And what is function? Well, predetermined outcomes that you agree with the patient, like more sleep, getting out and about more able to perform activities of daily living, basically being able to do the important things in life that the chronic pain's been preventing the patient from being able to do. So what are we going to prescribe? Well, usually it's an immediate release, sometimes a slow release preparation. If you're using an immediate release morphine, either liquid or tablet, then you try for a week or 2 or 3. Experiment with the doses, 5, 10, 20 milligrams when required or when anticipating pain. And if 20 milligrams isn't improving things and improving function, then you can consider that the trial has failed and you should stop the drugs. If you try a modified release preparation, then the trial might take a little bit longer, 3 to 4 weeks, because you want to be able to slowly increase the doses, probably up to 20 or 30 milligrams twice a day. And if this doesn't produce significant benefit, then again, the trial has failed. Stop the drugs. How long do we try for? Well, it depends on the nature of the pain, really. If it's pretty constant, then you should get a good idea within a small number of weeks, 2, 3 or 4 weeks. But if it's intermittent and only happens now and again, then you want to give it sort of 3 good goes, three pain flare-ups, trying the drug during 3 flare-ups to get an idea whether it's working or not. Now remember that there is often a benefit in chronic pain in the first few months of opioid treatment, and this is one of the major pitfalls that we've fallen into in the past, and that benefit subsequently wears off And if that happens, you need to be really careful to have a think about what you're going to do. If there's loss of benefit, are you going to increase the dose? No, be careful, because this might lead to problems. If you lose the benefit of a decent dose in your trial, something like 20 or 30 milligrams twice a day, the trial's failed. Stop the opioids. Right, here we are. She's back. She's had a month or so. She's got up to about 40 milligrams a day of morphine. And she seems to be doing better. She's able to get down to the shops and work around the house and do her housework and her hoovering that she couldn't previously do. She hasn't had bad side effects. She hasn't broken the contract. She hasn't been selling it to the school children. So we're keen to continue. She's filled out the diary nicely, and we can see the benefit. We can see the improvement to her life. So the early reports are good, and now what we're going to do is convert. Some patients do better with a slow release twice a day regimen. Some patients do better with a as required or when anticipated regimen. Bit of experimentation is required here. Use 60 milligrams a day as a sensible top limit, and then we need to extend the trial and just check that that initial improvement continues, because if it doesn't, you've got to consider that the trial's failed. Continuity of care and continuity of documentation. Continuity of care is very challenging nowadays because a lot of us only work half-time. So if you've got a shared list, consider a buddy system. So for example, if I work Mondays and Wednesday, my clinical colleague works Tuesday, Thursday, Fridays, then between the two of us we cover the whole week. So opioid prescribing can be taken on and only taken on by myself and my buddy. We're the only ones allowed to prescribe to these patients. You can share out the patients, try and accommodate their wishes if you wish, and have some clear pop-ups on the home screen. Regarding continuity of documentation, if you use a term that can be searched for, then it can bring up the opioid story easily to hand. So for example, in System 1 we've got a template in the Arden's templates, which is under auto consultation, then monitoring, then opiates, and you can input all sorts of information here, from an opioid trial to opioid tapering and side effects, etc. And then in the future, if I search for the word opiates, then it brings up all of these clinical or administrative consultations for me to see very simply. I can't really comment on whether EMIS or microtest systems have a similar capability, but I'm sure you can team up with some colleagues to design one. Possibly the CCG might be able to input into that. Okay, we've been through quite a lot there. Let's have a recap. We've got a patient with a history where examinations, investigations and referrals have all suggested a diagnosis of chronic pain, which is a stand-alone entity which we treat independently, and we've given the patient the information flyer so that they can read our work regarding self-management of chronic pain. They've had a think about all of that, they've absorbed the information, you've tried weak opioids, anti-inflammatories if appropriate, pain modulators if appropriate, and you give them a month or 6 weeks of this contemplation time to see how they're doing. And if between the two of you feel that their symptoms and function aren't good enough, then you can discuss opioids. Give them the written information which describes the risks and benefits, the dependence risk tool and the treatment agreement, and then you can see them again after a small number of weeks. Assess the dependence risk. If it's too high, then don't go further. If the risks are okay and everyone's agreeable, sign the contract if you want to, that's optional, and then you can get on with prescribing something. See them again after a small number of weeks, and if you're both happy that not just pain but function's improved, then you can repeat the prescription and then see them every small number of months to check that the benefit hasn't worn off. If the benefit's worn off and you feel you're slipping into that risk of higher and higher doses, then be careful, you might have to stop the trial. For those of you who like flowcharts and algorithms, the SIGN, Scottish Intercollegiate Guideline Network Management of Chronic Pain guideline has a nice flowchart which is pretty similar to our advice actually, which is good. Now remember that this idea of trying medications and deciding whether they've achieved the outcome that we want, whether it's opioids or any other type of painkiller, or I don't know, antihypertensives for example, we should always use the same thought processes. We're very good at starting drugs, but we're really not very good at stopping them, which is why patients end up on 10, 20, 30 different medications and they have all sorts of side effects. So whenever you start a drug, have a think about how long are you going to use it for, how are you going to tell whether it's worked or not, and if it's not working, then stop it. Right, well, we think we can't miss this opportunity to talk about some of our new kids on the block regarding neuropathic pain medications, the gabapentinoids and duloxetine for neuropathic pain. Let's run through some of the indications and possible benefits and risks there. Right, this slide is this is a good one. I'm quite proud of this one. This is a summary of 3 guidelines. There are 2 from NICE. One is from the Scottish Collegiate. There's the NICE Low Back Pain and Sciatica guideline, which is in red. The blue one is the SIGN Chronic Pain guideline, and the green one is the NICE Neuropathic Pain guideline. Now, remember that NICE haven't, at the moment, they're developing a chronic pain guideline. This is in evolution at the moment. So, this shows what drugs are recommended in different situations. Running across the top, acute back pain is non-steroidal anti-inflammatories first line, maybe weak opioids second line. For osteoarthritis, paracetamol anti-inflammatories are suggested, but you'll notice interestingly that there are some disparities. So for example, back pain, chronic back pain, the Scots say you can try some strong opioids and NICE say that you shouldn't. So this goes to show that there aren't any hard and fast rules when it comes to analgesia. Osteoarthritis, paracetamol, anti-inflammatories, strong opioids are reasonable. Neuropathic pain, yes from the Scots, no from NICE when it comes to strong opioids. And leading on to the bottom line, for back pain, none of those pain modulators are. So this is interesting, isn't it? Because I think very often we do prescribe pain modulators for back pain, for chronic back pain, but then none of the guidelines say that you should do it. It's just for neuropathic pain. Although there's some of the duloxetine evidence we might come to later. But yeah, just remember that amitriptyline, pregabalin, gabapentin, duloxetine from the Scottish and NICE guidelines are not suggested for simple non-neuropathic back pain. Arthritis, duloxetine has got an evidence base for arthritis, and in neuropathic pain, so what NICE say for neuropathic pain is take your pick out of tricyclics, gabapentin, pregabalin and duloxetine. And the Scots suggest using duloxetine more for diabetic neuropathy, and if not, then gabapentin or pregabalin. But we'll go into those in a bit more detail later. Let's talk about the use of gabapentinoids in chronic back pain a little bit more. This is a systematic review published in the Public Library of Science. So just as we said a moment ago, without any clear rationale, pregabalin and gabapentin are increasingly used off-label just for back pain. These guys found 8 randomized controlled trials regarding the use of these drugs in back pain for more than 3 months in adults. which showed gabapentin versus placebo, no improvement. Pregabalin versus other analgesics, worse with pregabalin. Pregabalin used as an adjunct to other analgesics, no better, but with significantly more side effects, with a number needed to harm of 6. Pregabalin side effects, particularly dizziness, fatigue, cognitive impairment and visual disturbance.
Aha, I hear you rubbing your paws. An audit opportunity. Why don't you see how many of your patients with non-neuropathic pain are being treated with gabapentinoids? Because they probably shouldn't be. Remember, these are neuropathic agents.
I'm going to focus a bit closer on pregabalin now. This is a Cochrane review of pregabalin for acute and chronic pain in adults from quite a time ago, 2009. So remember that pregabalin should be used in neuropathic pain. There's no studies looking at pregabalin in chronic non-neuropathic pain like arthritis. But in neuropathic pain at doses of 300, 450 or 600, so quite high doses, 300 to 600 milligrams a day, and it's effective in post-herpetic neuralgia, painful diabetic neuropathy, central neuropathic pain and fibromyalgia, but the lower doses were not effective. That's on the basis of 19 studies with about 7,000 patients. Okay, well we're saying that it proves benefit in these conditions. Well, how much benefit can we expect? Well, if we define benefit as at least a reduction in half of your pain over baseline, then the numbers needed to treat of a high dose of pregabalin, 600 milligrams a day, compared with placebo, numbers needed to treat of about 4 for post-herpetic neuralgia, 5 for diabetic neuropathy, 5.6 for central neuropathic pain, and 11 for fibromyalgia. Pretty good numbers, I think, actually, when it comes to numbers needed to treat, compared to a lot of our medical stuff. But you know, be aware that a quarter of patients stop taking their medication because of side effects. So I think these are useful bits of information to talk to patients about before prescribing for neuropathic pain. Quick recap, pregabalin in neuropathic pain, it's worth a go, but not in non-neuropathic pain. Use decent doses of 300 milligrams a day or more, and just like opioids, taper and cease the drug if the benefit is not adequate or there are side effects. Avoid in patients with a history of drug abuse. I'll tell you why in a second.
What's the risk of addiction with gabapentin and pregabalin? I'm sure you've heard about it. It's quite topical. There's a street value to these drugs. Prisons are full of it. Well, what appears to be the case is that they can be addictive for people who've got a tendency towards drug abuse, but not really for people who haven't. So if used at normal therapeutic doses, they're less addictive than benzodiazepines, opioids and alcohol. The patients who do use it as a drug of abuse, the reward, the high, the buzz that you get is for very high doses, sometimes 5 or 10 times the therapeutic dose. So take-home message, if you've got patients with a history of drug abuse, then avoid these 2 medications.
So we know that in the NICE guidelines you can take your pick of the neuropathic agents. Well, are they much different from each other? This trial here from this systematic review from 2010 suggested that there's no difference between tricyclics, gabapentin and pregabalin regarding their efficacy.
Let's talk about duloxetine quickly, an SNRI, serotonin noradrenaline reuptake inhibitor. So what's interesting here is that there appears to be an evidence base in the neuropathic conditions and fibromyalgia conditions, a bit like gabapentin and pregabalin, but also some non-neuropathic situations. So let's run through those. A systematic review in fibromyalgia, number needed to treat of 6, pretty good. In the signed guidance, they talk about an NNT in painful diabetic neuropathy of 6, pretty good. And also osteoarthritis, significant reduction in pain and improvement in function in osteoarthritis of the knee. That's interesting. And despite their official line regarding chronic back pain as well, it's not suggested by NICE. However, there was some evidence from one trial in the sign guidance that there's improvement in chronic back pain. So might be worth a try. The dose is 60 to 120 milligrams. I'll stick this table on the website somewhere for you to laminate or something. Okay, I think we should wind up now. I think you've got the message. If you're starting a drug, have a think about when you're going to review it. Think about how you're going to tell whether it's worked, and have a think about how you're going to stop it if it hasn't worked, whether that be painkillers, antidepressants, antihypertensives, folic acid, whatever. Thank you for listening. Good luck with it all, and give me a shout if you've got any thoughts or how we can progress this project further. Thank you.